His wife said, "Every day with you is a regret. I wish I could end this so-called marriage." He granted her wish in a devastating way. "This marriage is nothing but regret. I wish I could end it tonight." Those were the last words Clara Mitchell tossed like a dagger at her husband before leaning back with the smugness of a woman, convinced she held all the power. She had no idea that the man she had just humiliated had already chosen to walk away in a way that would dismantle her life piece by piece. What happened next will make you question how fast love can turn into ruin. Viewers, can words spoken in anger destroy a marriage faster than betrayal? Have you ever regretted something you said that you could never take back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The clink of silverware against ceramic echoed softly in the Mitchells' small dining room. The apartment wasn't run down, but it wasn't grand either. 2 bedrooms, cream-painted walls that had begun to fade, and furniture chosen more for durability than for flair. To Henry Mitchell, it was a stepping stone, a place to call home while they built something greater. To Clara, it was a reminder of what she didn't have. The big houses her friends flaunted on social media, the glinting cars that lined their driveways, the luxury vacations she scrolled past night after night. She sipped her wine and studied her husband across the table. Henry was in his usual button-down shirt, sleeves rolled at the elbow, collar slightly loose from a long day's work. He had the posture of a man carrying responsibility on his shoulders, the kind of quiet determination that didn't sparkle but ran deep. "Henry," Clara began, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "My birthday's next week. I think it's about time we upgrade my car. I've been driving that Toyota for years. I want something new. A Lexus. Something that actually reflects me." Henry looked up, his fork suspended for a moment. His brown eyes didn't flash with surprise. He had expected this. Clara had been hinting about it for weeks, sending him photos of sleek SUVs, sharing posts about the kind of luxury she thought she deserved. "Clara," he said evenly, placing his fork down. "The Toyota runs fine. It's paid off. It gets you where you need to go without debt hanging over us. Right now, we don't need another car. What we need is to save for a house. I don't want us renting forever. Owning our own place. That's what matters." His words were calm, measured, but they landed like stones on Clara's pride. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, lips tightening. "A house?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Henry, I'm not 21 anymore. I don't want to waste my best years living like some struggling couple pinching pennies for a dream that may never come. Look at my friends. Jessica's husband just bought her a Mercedes. Nicole's husband took her to Paris. And me? I'm stuck with a man who talks about mortgages while I'm still driving an old Toyota." Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash back. Years with Clara had taught him that shouting never solved anything. Still, her words cut deep. He thought of the nights he had ridden his e-bike in the freezing rain so she could have the car. He thought of the extra hours he worked, the savings account he built quietly so one day they could sign their names on the deed to a real home. "Clara," he said quietly, "you know I'm trying. Everything I do is to build a stable future for us. For you. But we have to live within our means. I don't want to be like those couples who look rich but are drowning in debt." She slammed her glass on the table so hard that the wine rippled dangerously close to the rim. Her eyes blazed. "Every day with you is a regret, Henry. Do you hear me? A regret. You've dragged me down. You've made me small. Other women are living. And I'm just surviving with a man who refuses to dream bigger. I wish I could end this so-called marriage and be free from you." The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Henry's face didn't harden, but something in his eyes shifted. A quiet resolve, a line crossed. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He leaned back slightly, folded his hands on the table, and spoke in a voice calm enough to chill her to the bone. "Wish granted." Clara blinked, caught off guard. She expected an explosion, maybe even pleading, but not this. Not the terrifying calm of a man who had decided something permanent in his heart. She narrowed her eyes, scoffed, and looked away, chalking it up to one of Henry's Empty statements. Henry didn't say another word. He finished his last bite of food, pushed his chair back quietly, and began clearing the plates as if nothing had happened. But in his chest, a decision was already hardening into steel. Henry moved like a shadow in the small apartment, careful not to wake Clara. Her breathing was steady, the kind of deep, satisfied rhythm of someone who believed they had won the argument. But Henry's mind was a storm. The words still rang in his ears. Every day with you is a regret. I wish I could end this so-called marriage. He had replayed them 100 times in his head since dinner. They weren't just words, they were a declaration, a line drawn that could never be erased. He sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, pen scratching numbers in neat rows. His savings, the bills, the rent, the emergency fund, years of sacrifices written down in columns. Clara never saw these figures, never asked how the lights stayed on, how groceries appeared, how her shopping trips were covered. To her, money was a faucet that should always run. To Henry, it was a dam he built brick by brick, praying it would hold. By 2 a.m., he had made his decision. He couldn't stay with a woman who openly despised him. Quietly, he opened the closet and began to fold his clothes into suitcases. Shirts, pants, the neatly stacked work uniforms she mocked as boring. Into another bag went his files, the legal papers, the receipts that showed how many times he had chosen her comfort over his. Each zipper closed with finality, the sound echoing in the silence of their bedroom. When he finished, 3 large suitcases sat lined against the wall. Henry slipped on his shoes, lifted the first case, and carried it to the parking lot. The cool night air stung his face as he opened the Toyota, the same car Clara had demanded he replace. She had insisted years ago that the car be registered in his name for tax and mortgage purposes, a detail she brushed off then, but one that mattered now. Every document for the vehicle was tucked neatly into his briefcase. One by one he carried the bags downstairs, loading them into the trunk. Each trip was heavier than the last, not just with weight, but with the quiet grief of a man packing away a life. By 3 a.m., everything that represented him, his clothes, his work gear, his documents, his memories, was inside the Toyota. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar hum of the engine filling the night. For years, he had ridden his e-bike through rain and winter cold so she could drive this car in comfort. Tonight, it was his escape. He drove across town, the city lights flickering past like distant stars, until he pulled into the driveway of Rick Dawson's modest house. Rick was waiting. Henry had called earlier, his voice steady but low. Rick didn't ask many questions, only nodded and helped him unload the car. Together they stacked the suitcases inside the spare room. Rick looked at his friend, reading the exhaustion on his face. "You sure about this, Henry?" he asked quietly. Henry nodded once. "I can't live with someone who sees me as a regret. I've tried. I've sacrificed. But she made her choice tonight. I'm making mine." Rick clapped him on the shoulder. Henry handed him the car keys and the folder of documents. "Keep it here. The title's in my name. She won't see this car again." Rick drove Henry back to the apartment, the 2 men silent except for the low hum of the road. When they arrived, Henry stepped out, thanked him, and watched the taillights disappear into the night. The building loomed before him, familiar and foreign all at once. He chained his e-bike at the side of the building, slipped back inside, and walked through rooms that already felt hollow. Clara slept soundly, unaware of the emptiness taking root around her. Henry stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at her face lit dimly by the glow of the alarm clock. Once, he had loved that face enough to build his world around it. Now, it was a mask hiding contempt. By 5 a.m., he was gone. The apartment door clicked shut behind him, the lock sliding into place with a finality that matched the vow he had made to himself. He climbed onto his e-bike and pedaled into the quiet streets, the city slowly waking around him. When the sun rose, Clara rolled over in bed and reached across the mattress, her hand brushing cold sheets. She opened her eyes to the sight of his empty side of the closet, his shoes missing from the corner. A slight frown crossed her face, but she shrugged it off. "He'll be back," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone. But Henry Mitchell wasn't coming back. The morning light stretched across the city, bouncing off rooftops and spilling into the streets. Henry had already been awake for hours. The wind from his e-bike ride still clung to his skin as he walked into the lobby of a downtown office building. His steps were steady, not rushed, not hesitant, the steps of a man who had decided to reclaim his dignity. The brass letters on the door read, "Law Offices of Parker Hillman." Inside, the receptionist greeted him politely, asked if he had an appointment. Henry's voice was calm. "No, but I need to speak with a divorce attorney today." The wait wasn't long. Soon he was seated across from Attorney Hillman, a sharp man in his early 40s with glasses perched neatly on the bridge of his nose. Henry explained in a quiet but unwavering tone what had happened. He didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. He spoke of years of sacrifice, the dinner table confrontation, the words that couldn't be unsaid. Hillman nodded thoughtfully, pen scratching across a legal pad. "We can file today. It won't be finalized overnight, of course. Divorce takes time. But once the papers are filed, the process begins. If you want, we can also request a financial freeze to protect your accounts until separation is formalized." Henry leaned back, hands folded in his lap. "File it. Do whatever is necessary. I can't give her any more power to tear me apart." By noon, the first step toward ending his marriage was complete. The ink on the legal documents was still drying, but Henry felt something lift inside him. Not relief, not joy, but clarity. From the attorney's office, he walked straight to the bank. The branch manager, a man who knew Henry from his careful deposits and long-term savings plans, greeted him warmly. Henry didn't waste words. "I need to close the joint account. Transfer my funds into a new private account. Effective today." There was no hesitation in his voice. Paperwork was signed, balances transferred, and by the time he stepped out of the bank's glass doors, Clara no longer had access to his earnings. The faucet had run dry. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Clara was in no rush. She had slept late, waking to find Henry still absent. She wandered through the kitchen, poured herself coffee and checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. She assumed he was at work, sulking, punishing her with silence. "Let him brood," she muttered, scrolling through photos of luxury cars online. Her mind was already racing with ways to pressure him again for the Lexus. She saw herself sliding behind the wheel, nails tapping against the leather steering wheel, friends admiring her upgrade. The thought gave her a smug smile. The hours drifted by. Clara dressed, went out to lunch with a friend, and talked about how Henry was being difficult again. She laughed off his absence, confident he'd crawl back, apologize, maybe even buy her something to make up for last night's tension. But Henry wasn't buying gifts. He was closing doors, one by one, with deliberate precision. After the bank, he sat in Rick's living room, the suitcases lined against the wall like soldiers awaiting orders. Rick brought him coffee, watching as Henry reviewed documents, filed receipts, made lists. "You've thought of everything," Rick said, half in admiration, half in concern. Henry nodded. "I have to. Clara always thought money appeared out of nowhere. She never knew the discipline it took. She'll know now." The afternoon stretched into evening. Clara's calls went unanswered. His phone was deliberately silent, tucked into his jacket pocket but switched to voicemail. She didn't notice until she tried paying for a round of shopping at Macy's. The cashier swiped her card twice before shaking her head. Declined. Clara frowned. Tried another card. Declined again. Heat rushed to her cheeks as other shoppers glanced in her direction. She laughed it off, pretended it was a technical issue, and walked out empty-handed. At home that night, she poured another glass of wine and told herself it was nothing. Maybe the bank is glitching. Henry will fix it tomorrow. She turned on the television, scrolled through her phone, ignored the emptiness of the apartment. But Henry was not fixing anything. He was dismantling the illusion piece by piece. His lawyer had the case. His bank account was secure. His belongings were safe at Rick's house. And for the first time in years, Henry slept soundly, free of the weight of Clara's constant comparisons, her contempt, her demands. The marriage wasn't legally over yet, but in every way that mattered, it was finished. On the fifth morning, a knock rattled the apartment door. Clara, still in her robe, opened it to find the landlord standing stiffly, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, his tone clipped. "The rent's due. We haven't received payment." Clara blinked, caught off guard. Henry always handled the rent. She smiled thinly, trying to mask the unease prickling her skin. "Oh, that's a mistake. My husband must have forgotten to set up the transfer." The landlord didn't return her smile. "It's already late. If we don't have the money by Friday, there'll be late fees. And if this continues..." His pause was deliberate. "We'll have to take legal steps." Clara's stomach tightened. She promised him it would be handled, closed the door and leaned against it, her pulse racing. For the first time, the walls of the apartment felt like they were pressing in, reminding her that Henry's steady hand wasn't there to keep the roof over her head. She scrambled to her laptop, tried once again to log into the joint account. Its balances read 0. Panic flickered across her face, though she pushed it away with the same denial she had been feeding herself since the night of the argument. Later that evening, she lit candles and poured herself another glass of wine, trying to restore some sense of control. But the silence in the apartment was deafening. No footsteps, no sound of Henry's keys at the door, no quiet muttering as he sorted through bills. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the echo of her own sharp words returning to haunt her. Across town, Henry sat in Rick's spare room, a stack of documents spread neatly across the bed. His life reduced to organized papers and a few suitcases. Rick leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching him. "You're settling in," Rick said quietly. Henry didn't look up. "I'm settling free." The tone in his voice was steady, like a man who had rehearsed this moment for years but never thought he'd truly live it. He wasn't angry anymore, not visibly. The fury that once burned had cooled into something sharper. Resolve. Rick nodded, respecting the weight of his friend's decision. "She called again?" "Voicemail," Henry said simply. He slid a folder closed and placed it carefully on top of the pile. "That's where she'll stay." Back in the apartment, Clara tried calling again. First with confidence, then with irritation, then with desperation. Each attempt landed in the same dark silence. She typed out messages filled with accusation, then apology, then empty threats. None delivered a response. By the end of the week, the utility company called. Payments had stopped. A notice appeared in her mailbox warning of suspension. Clara slammed the paper down on the table, hands trembling. For years, she had lived as though the lights would never dim, as though the rent would always be paid, as though Henry's sacrifices were an endless resource. Now the infrastructure of her life was crumbling. For the first time, Clara felt the hollow echo of Henry's words that night at dinner. Wish granted. She sat alone in the dim living room, candles flickering, shadows creeping across the walls. The silence was no longer a performance of his stubbornness. It was permanent. She picked up her phone one last time, stared at his name on the screen and whispered, "Come home." But her thumb never pressed the call button, because deep down, even through her pride, she knew he wasn't coming back. The apartment was dark except for a thin strip of light sneaking in through the blinds. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the final notice from the landlord lying open in front of her. The letters were bold, the language absolute. If payment wasn't made, she would be out. She pushed the paper aside and reached for her phone again. The screen lit her face in the dim room. No new messages, no return call. His number had become a hollow ritual. Dial, ring, voicemail. She set it down, her jaw clenched tight. A knock at the door pulled her up. She tied her robe quickly and opened it to a courier holding a thick envelope. He checked her name, had her sign, and left without a word. The envelope was heavy in her hand. She closed the door and stood still, the faint sound of her heartbeat filling the silence. At the table, she tore it open with unsteady fingers. A neat stack of papers slid out, stamped and bound with precision. Divorce filings. Legal. Final. Unavoidable. On top, a folded sheet of lined paper. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was firm, unhurried. You compared me to other men, but no other man would have carried what I carried for you. No other man would have sacrificed like I did. You wanted out. Wish granted. The words blurred. Her hands trembled. The page slipped from her fingers and drifted to the floor. She pressed her palms against the table, chest heaving, tears spilling without restraint. The refrigerator was silent. The lights had been cut for days. The apartment felt like a shell, each corner hollow, each shadow longer than the last. She bent to pick up the note, clutching it as if it might change if she held it tighter. Through the window, headlights swept across the parking lot below, then disappeared. Clara stood there, staring at the empty space where the Toyota used to be, the car she once demanded he replace. Only asphalt remained. The sound of her sobs filled the stillness, echoing off bare walls. She had spoken the words carelessly that night, expecting him to argue, to bend, to return. Instead, he had listened, and he had answered. The papers lay on the table, the ink fresh, the decision irreversible. Sometimes words are like egg. Once broken, it can never be fixed. What do you think? Was Henry right to grant her wish, or should he have stayed and fought for the marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.